5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 9 of That Real Estate Podcast with Henry Matthews. Today, I'm joined by Jon. Jon has an electrical company and has a contracting company in the greater Hamilton area here in Southern Ontario. And I've asked him to come on to speak with us today about the process of converting single-family homes to multifamily homes from a technical perspective. I know we've had a lot of guests come on and they talk about BRRRR and flipping and all these kind of strategies, and they're approaching it from the investment side. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a taste into how things kind of work on a technical side and what work is required to go into that in order to make it happen. Again, if you like these videos, please go ahead and subscribe. Like the video, leave a comment if you feel so inclined. We have seen a lot of great traction on the Instagram page as well. I think we're approaching 700 followers now, which is really great. I think when this video comes out, that should be roughly about a month worth of time since we started that Instagram page. So I don't know a lot about what constitutes a great Instagram follower number versus average, but I'm pretty humbled by the fact that there's that many people interested in sort of what my message is and what we're trying to do. But with that being said, welcome to the show, Jon.
Thank you for having me.
No problem, anytime. If you could take a minute and just kind of explain to people what you do and the different sort of hats that you wear and some of the projects that you guys are involved in, I'd really appreciate that.
Sure. So my name is Jon Tenbrinke. I own Blackjack Contracting. I own TNL Wiring Pros, and I host my own YouTube channel, the REI Contractor Show. So on Blackjack Contracting is a real estate investor only contracting business. We do not work for homeowners or the general public. We just stick to real estate investing. Our specialty is legal second suites duplex conversions. As of shooting this today, we've just wrapped up on 121 and we have 14 active ones on the go. We're serving now from London, Ontario to Welland, Ontario, anywhere in between. So we also do BRRRR renos, we also do flips, but that's our specialty. And it's been a lot of fun, a wild ride. And then the wiring company, general wiring company, that's mostly real estate investing work because it does a lot of work for myself, obviously. But it's been, we've been doing it for about 4 years on the general contracting side, just under. And I think we've done, I don't know, 300 something investor projects. And it's a lot of fun. Nowadays, I focus on doing stuff like this, teaching, doing my show to teach duplex conversions and the contractor side. So obviously, there's a lot of real estate investor focused people on different aspects on either the acquisition side or the numbers side, and I try to teach the actual technical side.
I think that's a great thing for people to know. I know there's a lot more information out there about becoming an investor and not really a lot about what the nitty gritty is and how to kind of execute all that from a technical perspective. Sort of digging into it, I guess my first question is going to be, if somebody has a single family home, could you walk us through the steps that would be required legally in order to convert that single family home, whether you're taking it from, a single family to a triplex or you're just adding a unit in the basement? What are the steps that homeowner is going to need to take from a construction standpoint in order to execute on that?
Sure. So I guess there's two different ways to look at it. If you're acquiring a new property, before you do the acquisition, you want to make sure that you are working with a focused people that can help you find out the actually zoning of the property and what's actually allowed to happen there. That gets missed sometimes and it becomes a bigger issue. And if you already have the property, then that's great. And then what we want to do first is we want to also confirm that zoning to let us know what we can do. So if we have a property and we're saying we're going to add that unit, first step is if we have the proper zoning, then we look into getting the drawing and paperwork permit part done. And so what I do is I hire a BCIN designer, and we'll draw up plans that meets the building code, and we'll submit for permits so we actually can do the construction. And if we're going to get into more like triplexes, fourplexes, there's more than likely going to be some more issues to be attend to, maybe minor variances or zoning changes. And that all gets done by the team we hire from the BCIN/designer department. And I just put my 2 cents in on the technical aspect. Once we've done that and we get it submitted to the city, then we do the pre-construction planning with you to obviously get our quotes, our budgets, our layouts, all that fun stuff to make sure we get what you want, and we're going to maximize your return on investment.
Okay, so obviously, so someone's gone through that step. From an electrical side, plumbing, gas, fire safety, accessibility, emergency exits. What is kind of the bare minimum requirements? Obviously, it's specific to our region here in Southern Ontario, and different municipalities, those requirements may change. What is the bare minimum requirement that someone would be looking at as far as making a space that would be a rental compliant?
So it's important to know each region's rules, but once you get past their rules on, say, bedroom sizes or parking is a big one. Once we get into it, we're past that point and we have our technical aspect. There's a couple different sections of the building code, and this gets kind of technical, but I'll just do it briefly. Nowadays, for a second unit, we try to use Part 11 of the building code, which is very minimum code. It's got some cheat rules in it for cost purposes. Basically, we need a minimum sound rating of 50, which is just simply how we build the assembly to make sure that we're not going to have crazy sound. And then we have a minimum fire rating of 20 minutes if we use this. We have to have interconnected smoke detectors. We have to have an in-duct smoke detector. That's your basic minimum fire safety. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, and I'll go into it and I'll show you where you can find that information. On a plumbing and electrical standard, each trade has their own rules. Plumbing is pretty straightforward rules across the board. It's a fixture count. It's a size of water lines separating the water between the two units. Electrical has a minimum service size. So when we have to do a service calculation, we can't just leave a 100-amp panel and run 2 electric stoves and 2 electric dryers, for example. We have to have a minimum service size of 125 amps. So usually we just put it to 200, and usually we separate it so tenants pay their own hydro. HVAC, we need an in-duct smoke detector and make sure it has adequate airflow, and we protect each unit with that in-duct smokes and make sure that we have adequate cold air. That's the kind of thing. There's about 80. I run it in about 85 steps to do a duplex conversion, but the minimum you need for each thing, each section has its own difference, and it gets long and winded from there. But even if you have an existing basement that is finished and you want to bring it up to fire code, some cities will let you keep the existing drywall rating, some cities won't, and that's something that your designer and contractor will help you walk through. And obviously there's a big difference in cost, but there's also things to consider, like if you leave it, you're going to have terrible noise transfer. Are you willing to accept that? And the tenant complaints, that kind of thing.
So are you required in our region to have separate electrical meters for each unit? No,
you're not. You're just required to have the minimum ampacity to allow for the house, or the minimum size of service. There is nowhere that forces you to have separate meters and in multis. Most people do it. I've had 98.6% of my projects separated, but some people decide to save a little bit of cost and not do it.
that's excellent. I've had several questions from investors, actually, people that are looking to kind of take that step and get into real estate investing. And that was kind of the assumption that they had. So I wanted to clarify. When it comes to HVAC, obviously a standard single family home, the thermostat's usually in a common place.
Mm-hmm.
When you do your setups and your designs, how do you usually handle where that thermostat's located?
Unfortunately, it's one of the biggest flaws in doing legal second suites and duplexes on a cost front is the fact that we have a shared heating system and we can only control it from one place. So most of the time it's based on the main floor. And what I always tell tenants is to, or sorry, the landlords is to put it in one of those glass lockable things and set it and forget it for per season, because you don't want it too cold downstairs. You also don't want it too hot upstairs type thing in order to have a cheap balance. So it is a flaw. And it's something that's hard to overcome. Now, I mean, there's obviously other ways to handle it, like separate heating systems and separate cooling systems and all that stuff, but it's obviously quite costly. So most of the time it's just based on the main floor in a common area, and it's supposed to be just left at 73 degrees, for example, year round, and changed from heating and cooling. Now, a lot of investors are obviously getting into the Nest thermostat, the Ecobee, something that the landlord can control from a remote location so that they can make sure that everybody keeps even and it's not being abused.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I know I have a Nest thermostat where I live, um, and we're big fans of it as well. And I have heard some great things about that. I know that they make a line of smoke detectors as well, and you did mention that they all have to be wired in.
There,
Um,
there's a code to buildings to building codes. They have to be interconnected. Has to be a strobe lights now. So those crazy bright lights that you see flashing, they're quite expensive, but they have to have 3-in-1s, carbon dioxide, smoke, and strobe in the common areas and hallways. It has to be 2-in-1s in the bedroom, smoke and strobe. So the ones that are connected like Ecobee and Nest would actually be in addition to the building code ones.
okay, which is really, really good to know. And then obviously on the plumbing side, um, your primary concern is basically the diameter of the piping in the house, just to sort of accommodate the water.
We need a minimum of 3/4 inch to each floor, and they need to be separated between the two units so that the water pressure upstairs and the water pressure downstairs stays even. Nowadays, the size of the pipe coming in from the street is becoming a major issue, especially in the older Hamilton, older St. Catharines neighborhoods, like anything that's old 1950s, 40s. We want to make sure that the building inspectors are going to ask, but a lot of these houses are 1/2 inch lead lines, or 3/8 lead lines, or even as low as 5/8, and they're asking for a minimum of 3/4, a lot of times 1 inch. So when you're buying a property, you need to consider that you're probably looking at 3,000 to 4,000 to upgrade your water. But you're going to have a much better pressure and a lot less issues, but it's just something to be aware of when you're in the initial process.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you explain we had Brian Karski on last episode, and he was talking about um, the requirements for ceiling height when you're dealing with a duplex, triplex, something
Sure.
like that. And he was talking about I a certain percentage. I'll let you kind of speak to that. You're the pro on that. How does that work as far as ceiling height? Obviously, basements in our particular region are a particular challenge. Um, how do you kind of get around that when you're converting space into rental?
Okay, so it's important to know that triplexes and anything above 3 units and duplexes have different rules. And that's something that when you're walking through to know, but let's just use a legal second suite or a duplex for an example. In Hamilton, they use the National Building Code, which allows under ceilings, under bulkheads and beams, they allow 6'1", where most other areas, it's minimum 6'5", and then the average of the basement needs to be at least 6'9", and some places use 6'11". So it depends on either region, but it's important to know. So you have to be, the biggest issue we usually run into with these basements is underneath the ductwork and the beam. The beam is an easy workaround with doing layouts. You build walls underneath the beam, and that way it doesn't count. Where in ductwork, we have a lot more problems because it runs throughout, where sometimes we have to get into flattening ducts, which makes bigger bulkheads but lowers the space. And sometimes it's so extreme, I've had to remove the duct system completely and switch heating systems to baseboard heat and ductless splits for cooling. And that's something that matters per region and matters per height. So if you have something that averages 6'9", but you have a ductwork problem, more than likely we can come up with a solution for you. Thing you got to be aware of, obviously, is it's going to be more expensive.
Yeah, but however, if that's the thing that's holding you back and you have a misconception of the fact, well, I have this duct in the middle and obviously this will never be a rental space. It is nice to know that, your vision isn't going to end right there. There are ways to kind of work around that,
Absolutely.
which is important. One thing that often shocks me as I'm going out and looking at homes and doing home inspections with clients is just sort of how electrical safety seems to be something that people generally don't think a lot about when they're doing their own DIY renovations, right? Um, can you explain generally, as a master electrician, why it's important for people not to attempt some of these projects unless they're competent and capable of doing that work?
Yeah, so I don't want to be the doom and gloom guy, but I've seen too many state cases in my life of people dying and people severely getting injured and property loss over homemade wiring jobs. Unfortunately, I mean, I understand tradespeople are expensive, and that's my only really good explanation of why people try to do it themselves. But it's in most cases, it's just not worth it, and they mess up the value of the home. So my point is that electrical inspection, people want to avoid building inspections. They're afraid of getting caught or afraid of raising their taxes or having to get new inspections or upgrade something. But most people don't realize that electrical has nothing to do with the actual cities. That's called the Electrical Safety Authority, and they run the province. They don't communicate with the cities. It's strictly electrical. So people will sometimes say, "Oh, I don't want inspections. I don't want inspections." Well, an electrical inspection is under $200 for a big project, and if you don't get an inspection and there's a fire in your home, and you find bad wiring, and they find new wiring, and most people don't realize there's dates on wire, that the insurance will deny your claim, and you can lose everything over $150 or $200 electrical permit, or a few extra $100 for an electrician. It's just not worth it. And most of these times I'm going into these properties, and one of the bigger bills in part of these process is the electrician to fix all the crap that's been done. So if you're competent, then go ahead and try. You still have to take out a permit as a homeowner. You have the right to take out your own electrical permit, but you cannot hire Joe Blow to anybody but a licensed electrical contractor. Not even a licensed electrician, a licensed electrical contractor to do wiring in your home. And the fines are, if you get caught doing that, are 10,000 above, and some people have been put in jail. So it's just something that, in my opinion, isn't worth it, and I highly recommend using proper people.
Absolutely. Just to clarify, so even if you hire somebody who is an electrical contractor, or you're doing it yourself and you are competent, let's say, you apply for the permit. How does that kind of happen? Like, what are the steps in the permitting process? Obviously, someone's going to be coming out and visiting
Yeah,
the property to see the work, but how does that work?
it's super with the ESA. It's super easy and super fast. They have an internet base. They have a customer service rep. So if I call on a Monday morning at 8:30, I will have an issued permit to me by 8:45 that morning. It's instantaneously once you take it out and pay the fees. Um, if you're doing wiring work within 48 hours of work starting, you have to have a permit in place. So if you hire an electrician, you want to make or electrical contractor, first thing you want to do is make sure he takes out his permit. And if you are doing the work yourself, take out the permit before you start. Once you've completed, say, the rough-in phase, so the rough wiring, you call out the inspector. They're not like booking 2 weeks in advance. It's usually within a few days. So book it in advance if you have a quick timeline. They come out and check the work, and if there's no problems, he lets you go. He'll be back when it's final. And if there's problems, he'll show you what the problems is. He'll give you a piece of paperwork documenting that. You must fix it and get re-inspected before you go on to the next stage. So it's a lot different, obviously, for a contractor that does this daily with the relationships and a homeowner, but it's overall a pretty simple process.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just an interesting thing, and I assume that there's a sort of an equal process when it comes to general overall building code as well.
That's a completely different process. And so basically that one, you have to fill out all the documents and paperwork and have drawings in place and fill out all the appropriate sheets, go down to the city, file them, pay all your fees, and then they have to review it within 10 days. And then they have to give you a letter of correction within 10 business days. And then after the 10 business days, if you've given the letter, there's no timeline anymore. So it could take you 6 to 8 weeks to get permits. And then once you have the permit, it's pretty easy with them. A couple of days, they'll come out, check the work, all that stuff. But it's a completely different than getting the process. That's why at the beginning of your project, so one of the first, you want to get that designer and blueprints and submit it as soon as possible because it's a slow period. And after you get it, it's a lot easier.
I find it funny that the electrical permit is so much faster than the rest, right?
Crazy.
You would assume that they would be more equal there. Is there anything, and I know that you can speak specifically to our region here. If a homeowner were to switch like a light, say in the kitchen, switch a plug to a dimmer, is there anything that wouldn't necessarily require an inspection?
Yeah, so if anything that you swap like for like, so if there's a plug already there and you put a new plug on, no permit. There's a light fixture there, you change the light, no permit. The only thing when you have to start taking permits if you modify or have to touch wiring. So if you're switching from a light fixture to a pot light, that would need to require a permit because you're changing the wiring. But if you're just replacing your plugs in the house, go right ahead. If you're replacing the lights in your house, go right ahead. It's anything you add or adjust wiring is when you have to get permits.
Okay. One thing that I've encountered several times, especially in the older part of Hamilton, where we're from, is something called a knob and tube conversion. And I've seen them done well, and then I've seen other ones where they just seem to basically leave the knob and tube and splice together 14-2, 12-2, and try and basically hide it from an inspector.
You're horrifying me just talking about this nightmares, but yes.
I've encountered it like literally almost half a dozen times during home inspections, and thankfully I work with what I consider to be the best home inspectors for my clients, and they're smart enough that they dig a little deeper and usually find that splice just outside the box. And there's some other things that kind of tip them off as well. But can you explain for the people watching how dangerous that is and what could happen?
So I've done in my career, before I started doing basement suites, I was a knob and tube specialist. So I've done over 300 knob and tube rewires. And so if I'm expert in one thing, that would be it. I've seen it all when it comes to people trying to hide knob and tube. I've actually opened up the wall and seen 37 different connections right below a 4-gang switch box because they just took a piece of brand new white wire, threaded it to the knob and tube, and pushed it down in the wall to make it look like it was done. It's fascinating. I've seen junction boxes in basement buried right over top where the knob and tube connections to make people hide there was knob and tube. Honestly, the time that they spent doing this crap, I could have rewired the house. It was fascinating. So knob and tube is two individual conductors, the hot wire and neutral wire, and it's spliced all over the house, and the connections are done in the walls or down in the basement or in the attic. And basically when you say you went to a switch bank, they would just bring a live wire in and then splice it out from there from the switches and go up, and all the neutrals would be connected in the walls. I know that gets a little technical, but the point of it is, so knob and tube is almost impossible to trace or repair if it gets broken, and all the connections were done in solder and hockey tape in the walls, basically that type of material. So when you start messing with knob and tube has really brittle insulation on it. And what happens is that when the insulation fails and you get to the connections that were soldered and the connection fails, it starts arcing. And arcing is the same temperature as the sun. It's that hot. And that's how all the house fires started. So knob and tube that's never been touched is perfectly safe. It's just they were not designed for today's environment. Back then they had a clock, radio, and a lamp. So it wasn't designed for the load we use today with all the stuff, TVs, computers, all that stuff. And so when people started messing with knob and tube because we wanted to modify it, that's what caused most of the house fires. So it's impossible to see when it's buried in the walls. It is so dangerous to touch it and to modify it. If it's there and it's in itself, there's no problems with it. But when you put a piece of new iron right in the wall and just throw it down there, that is highly likely to arc over time because the connections get hot. And inside those walls is something called lath. It's lath and plaster. We've probably all heard about it. And it's 100-year-old dry wood that literally would spark up with a flint. And so now you're subjecting this heat of the sun into a dry wall, inside walls, and that's how you're in. They'll never put that fire out without the house going down. So it's something that it takes a trained eye to catch the stealing of the knob and tube. If you're buying anything 1930 or older, pay an electrician a couple hours to come out and really take a good look at the wiring. It could be the best few $100s you ever spent.
Absolutely. I completely agree. If knob and tube is sort of the worst thing on the electrical side, is there an equivalent on the plumbing side?
Yeah, galvanized piping. So galvanized piping is galvanized as a type of material, and we used it a lot back in those days. And it was fine, but the problem is that rust forms on the inside. And where the fittings, when the 90 fittings and the elbows get fitted in, it's got threads. And it's because all the rust starts forming, and it's years and tens of decades of year where that rust forms, it starts breaking apart the joints. And it's basically a time bomb of plumbing waiting to go off. At one point it will break, and then you're going to have a massive leak or a massive flood. So if you see galvanized water lines, especially, we have galvanized drains in a lot of old houses too. They're not as big of a deal because they're not under pressure. But I'd still want to get them out if I had the house, especially because they are eventually going to leak. But if we have galvanized plumbing water lines, we want to get those replaced immediately.
One of the things that often end up in a agreement of purchase and sale is the understanding that the seller is not aware of UFE insulation being in the home. And oftentimes, I'm not a professional. I have a general understanding of UFE insulation.
Are you speaking about vermiculite? Just for
Yeah.
the same. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Right. So, you know, I often give my best understanding of what it is, but I'm not a professional contractor. It seems like it causes a lot of health issues. And I'm wondering,
go ahead, sorry.
Go into some detail about why we use it, how you might be able to determine whether you have it in your home, how you would make it go away if you did, and why we move to maybe more modern solutions nowadays.
Yeah. So I'm just going to call it vermiculite because that's how I know it by, but basically it looks like giant grains of cat litter. And if you're going to see it, you're going to see it mostly in the attic. And it was basically just a blown in substance. And it was, so usually if you have it, you're going to see a layer of bad insulation when you go up in the attic hatch. Hopefully you have one, and you're just going to move that bat and you're going to see it. If you see something that looks like grains, it's thick white grains and it's very fertile, don't touch it yet. There's two types in Canada. There's non-asbestos and there's asbestos, but only, I forget the exact statistic, but I think it's 7% There's only 7% of it that was created that has asbestos. Most of Canada is not asbestos, the stuff that was installed. Unfortunately, you can't tell that without doing a test. So you can either have a company come in and do a test for you, or you can very carefully bag a small sample. This is just me saying it. That's not the technical answer. And take it to a testing facility and tell you whether you have asbestos or not. If you do have asbestos, that's a professional abatement. You're going to hire an environmental company, and they're going to have to come in and suck it out and make sure it's negative air, all that. If it's not asbestos, it's something that can be handled by yourself using shop vacs, and make sure it's a dusty process. You want to use an air filtration system and make sure you're wearing a mask. The problem is that because it was so loose and free, that it would fall down into the walls. So back in my electrician day, I went to cut in a new receptacle on a knob and tube job on the outside wall, and I opened up I cut in the box, and vermiculite started pouring out the hole, and it did not stop for 12 hours. I had to shop back in there, everything. I just kept calling out. So it's something that takes a little professionalism. If you're a real DIY person, you could try, but I would probably hire a company with a pro shop vac to come suck it out, and then you would add your new insulation afterwards. It's just something you have to make sure you get tested before you start messing with it.
The UFE insulation, actually, I'm trying to remember what the acronym is. It's a Urea Formaldehyde foam insulation. So it does.
Oh, is that the
look
retrofit
like
foam? The retrofit.
Yeah, it
foam.
looks like spray foam, but it's not spray foam.
Yeah. So they started doing, I think it was in the late 90s or 2000s. I'm not an expert on this subject. I just remember watching information about it. And they started retrofitting homes that didn't have insulation. And so they would drill holes from the outside of the home, and they would inject it in your home. But it wasn't the right material, and it was just doing little sections. And there was some health hazard to it that I forget exactly what it was. I'd have to look it up, but it's something that would definitely take a professional's eye. I am not a professional in this subject.
Okay, so we'll try and link some information down below for people watching as well. That being said, the last thing I wanted to kind of bring up is you mentioned getting the water upgraded for the city in older homes. What's the process like in order to accomplish that? Like, is that the city's responsibility? Is it the homeowner's responsibility?
There's two sections. Obviously, same with every property. There's the homeowner's property, there's the city property. What happens is, if you have, like for Hamilton, for example, if you have a lead water pipe coming in, there's a grant going on. So they will do everything from from their connection to the street for free, and you pay for your part. So I'm having two done right now. There's a contractor out here in Hamilton that I would gladly refer, because he's done a great job. DM me if you want the information. And it's a $3,000 flat fee. They do the dig, they run the new line, and they tie in the new water meter, and the city does it from the street over. It takes about 3 weeks to coordinate, obviously not in winter time. It's a relatively painless process, except for understanding that there's going to be a little landscaping to fix afterwards, because they have to put a pile of dirt and it's got to settle for a little while before you can put it back. Basically, they're upgrading it. Usually I would say go 1 inch minimum, you'll never have a problem. And they run a new line into the house, tie into the water meter, and the rest of the piping, if you're doing a renovation, would more likely be replaced with PEX anyways. And then you're going to have 2 3/4 inch lines, one feeding the basement, one feeding the upstairs, or with triplex, another unit. And then your water pressure is going to be fantastic. There's going to be no surges or stops, and it's a pretty painless process, to tell you the truth.
I got 2 more questions before I let you go.
No problem.
The next one is windows for a basement. How big do they need to be? What are the general requirements in our area for basement windows?
If you're going to do if you're adding a basement unit and you're doing a basement conversion, basically, the requirements is 2.5% natural light for a bedroom. Now, the designer is going to spec that, okay, because it's based on square footage, a percentage of light. The biggest light requirement is for your living room / dining room, and that's a minimum of 5%. So usually that's why you'll notice in a conversion project that's where always cutting in a big, large window. usually about 4 feet by 2 feet. It's big, it's wide, and it's nice. And usually it'll take care of the egress at the same time. That's a whole different conversation. But so you want to make sure every bedroom has a good size window. You want to make sure every living room has lots of light. Kitchens have no requirement for lights. It's just the living room and dining room have a large requirement for light.
Okay, what are the requirements for the bedroom windows? That is a point of a lot of speculation with people as far as people being able to get out in an emergency.
They are not required to be egress windows. Only one window in your basement is required to be egress, and that's 3.8 square feet of opening. So that's sash opening. So that's from the plastic piece to the plastic piece. It can't be the whole pane of glass. Whatever it can be opened, the open space has to be 3.8 square feet to meet egress. It cannot use tools to open. It has to be a single motion, easy motion to be considered egress. We do not need one in every bedroom. We have to have one minimum. Now, if your basement has direct access outside, so it has a walkout basement, you require 0 egress windows. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but that's the rule.
Interesting. If you hire a contractor, they come out and they tell you that they don't require a permit to do a conversion, you should run away, right?
There's no such thing. I mean, it's just, listen, it's more expensive to do it. Your house will be more valuable. It's safer, and the risk you're taking not to do it legal is you got to be a real big gambler. There is no work basically that doesn't require permits. The only thing that doesn't require permits is swapping things out like for like. So, if you're just the place you're putting new floors down, no permit. You're replacing the kitchen, no permit. Changing your windows, no permit. Just changing the toilet, no permit. But if you're moving the toilet and you're redoing all the plumbing, that requires a permit. So there's very little stuff that actually doesn't require a permit.
Fair enough. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking time out.
Anytime.
You're a very busy guy, and I do very much appreciate it. And I'm sure the viewers do as well. If someone had any question about anything electrical, converting a unit to a rental unit, or converting any space in their home into a rental unit, I should say,
Yep.
or anything that you might be able to help them with, what is the best way for them to reach you?
So we have our websites and we have our social media. So for Blackjack Contracting, it's at Blackjack Contracting Inc. For wiring, it's at TL Wiring Pros, and then the website is tlwiringpros.ca, blackjackcontractinginc.ca. Or if you just want to speak to me or watch about learning duplex conversions and real estate investing, it's REI Contractor.ca.